The Department of Justice has released 3 million previously unseen documents, pictures, and videos related to Jeffrey Epstein.
Trump is mentioned more than 1,000 times in the newly released documents.
On Monday, members of Congress will be able to begin reviewing unredacted versions of those Epstein files.
Millions of pages were just released, containing thousands of images. Right now, names are trending. Screenshots are everywhere. Every scroll promises proof. But here's the problem. The stories are getting darker and darker every single day, and a lot of them aren't being read correctly. The United States Department of Justice released a massive archive of Epstein-related documents, photos, emails, depositions, and FBI tips. Not new indictments, not a client list, and not criminal verdicts. Still, online, nuance collapsed instantly. Because the truth is, it now feels like being mentioned is treated as proof of guilt. Being photographed became an accusation, and allegations became conclusions. And for survivors, this moment is brutal. Their trauma is recycled, while accountability still feels incomplete. On the other hand, for the public, it feels like another reminder that power rarely answers to anyone. And for social media, it's the perfect storm. Secrecy, crimes, famous names, and just enough information to fuel outrage without actually delivering answers. So what exactly was released in the Epstein documents, and why did it trigger such a massive backlash now? When powerful names appear in the Epstein files, what does that really mean? And where does accountability stop and speculation begin? And how did social media turn the Epstein files into viral weapons? And what gets lost when outrage moves faster than facts? So today we're going to slow it down. We're reading the files in a way investigators do, not the way algorithms want us to. We're separating evidence from interpretation, documentation from speculation, and fact from viral certainty. This episode exists to confront something ugly, the horror of what one man was able to do. And still, we don't believe for a second that this story begins and ends with a single name. And honestly, we don't think you do either. Because when you look at the files, what stands out is a web. Not every name mentioned is a criminal. But let's be honest, presence creates noise, and noise creates questions. And that's exactly what the Noisy Dish is here to unpack. But let's rewind for a moment. Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in July 2019 at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was one of the most shocking moments in recent legal history. At that point, federal prosecutors charged him with sex trafficking of minors. The indictment described a scheme involving underage girls recruited to his Manhattan townhouse and his Palm Beach estate. At that moment, the public believed something historic was finally happening. For over a decade, Epstein had avoided serious consequences, all because back in 2008, he secured a controversial non-prosecution agreement in Florida, a deal later condemned by a federal judge for violating victims' rights. That agreement allowed him to serve just 13 months in a county jail with work release privileges. So when he was arrested again in 2019, people thought, this time the system won't look away. But then, as we know, he allegedly died in federal custody on what was officially ruled as a suicide. Yes, surrounded by camera failures, sleeping guards, and unanswered procedural lapses. And just like that, the case transformed from a prosecution into a mystery. But in early waves of document disclosures between 2020 and 2024, courts and agencies released fragments, flight logs, deposition excerpts, civil filings from Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell, and partial email records. However, most of it was heavily redacted. The names were blacked out and paragraphs obscured, large portions withheld under privacy and investigative exemptions.
I thought this was supposed to be the most advanced security system on the planet.
Then came January 30th, 2026.
Today we are producing more than 3 million pages, including more than 2,000 videos and 180,000 images.
But before you can view any of them, the DOJ makes you confirm you are over 18, because the material is intense and graphic and not for casual scrolling. And I can personally confirm that what is in there is very, very dark. So what was actually left out? According to court rulings and DOJ policy, anything that could compromise an active investigation showed torture or severe physical abuse, or include certain protected intelligence, simply didn't make it into the public view.
Bro, they uploaded all of Jeffrey Epstein's email into a thing that basically simulates his email called jmail.world. That's the URL. You can go through his Gmail like it's your Gmail.
It was a flood.
In these files, they say some important people had parties at a specific place called Calendar Girl parties. Mind you, these files just dropped and they started deleting files already. People start making noise and they start putting the files back.
But then something happened that escalated outrage. All the redaction errors. The Department of Justice failed to properly black out identifying information about many of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, while at the same time redacting details about people who may have helped him. Victims were exposed and potential enablers were protected. And survivors are furious, understandably so. They're accusing the DOJ of completely botching the release. Just imagine surviving something like that, and then seeing your information mishandled in a document dump that's now being dissected by the entire internet.
The worst of it is it has my full name, my birthday, my address. The thing that is redacted is Danny in that.
Her nickname.
And I'm not the only one. Like, how is any of this acceptable?
That imbalance is what transformed this document dump into a moral flashpoint.
If you want to become a real massage therapist, you can come for the interview tonight, and if he likes you, then you'll be a real masseuse. He said, take off your clothes. I had these little girl undies on, like little hearts on them, I remember, and they were laughing at that because they like that. The younger you look, the better it is.
And you probably already know about Virginia Giuffre, right? For those who don't know, she had long alleged abuse and named powerful associates of Jeffrey Epstein's. But her courage came with a price. She had endured intense public scrutiny. The tabloids and broadsheets often referred to Giuffre, known then as Virginia Roberts, as a masseuse. Coverage largely included one-word quotes from Giuffre, but nothing that humanized her to readers. Other survivors had testified in sealed depositions, believing that their identities would remain protected.
Some survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's pointing out missing redactions in the new files, including Danny Bensky, who says she was infuriated to see her own name, her own address, her own phone number unredacted.
I thought it was carelessness, and then I went to incompetence, and now it feels a bit deliberate. I feel like the Department of Justice has really made us feel unsafe.
And then there's the diary. We still don't know for sure if the diary's contents are true or not, but either way, it's devastating. It's a 32-page document written by a victim describing being used as a human incubator for a child fathered by Epstein in an effort to seed the human race with his DNA. According to the unidentified girl and author of this diary, quote, "Superior gene pool? Why me? It makes no sense. Why my hair color and my eye color?" End quote. The diary confirms she was the surrogate mother for a 4-pound baby, which she wrote was the child of Epstein and Maxwell. The words in the diary are haunting. Quote, "Unlike drugs, a child's body can be sold over and over." End of quote. Let that sink in. Now the question is, who exactly is being protected? The release of the files themselves had been delayed for months. Congress ultimately passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act in mid-November 2025, forcing the DOJ to begin phased disclosures starting on December 19th.
Every single person who voted, bar one individual, voted in favor of this bill. The one nay came from a Republican representative from Louisiana, but everyone else who voted in favor, and that's despite there being deep divisions within the Republican Party.
Even then, controversy followed. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna and Republican Congressman Thomas Massie both claimed that at least 6 men were redacted from public versions, despite appearing very likely to be incriminated in unredacted files reviewed by lawmakers. And that gap between exposure and action is where the backlash lives. Here's the paradox. Much of this material isn't new. Epstein's crimes were well documented years ago. Let's remember that Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's ex-partner and accomplice, was convicted in 2021.
The jury has reached a verdict in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. This just coming in as we speak. Maxwell guilty of sex trafficking charges. She had pleaded not guilty to those charges, that she helped her boyfriend turned business partner Jeffrey Epstein recruit and sex abuse under girls at his private properties, including a home on Palm Beach.
And civil lawsuits exposed details long before this release. So why did this moment feel so explosive? Well, because the stories feel endless. Every single day there's a new headline, somehow more deranged than the one before it. And also because the world is already in chaos mode. While the Epstein files are making their rounds, Trump is publicly reviving the idea of acquiring Greenland. Sounds random, right? Except history makes it weirder. Back in 1917, the US bought the Danish West Indies, what we now call the US Virgin Islands, in a deal that included assurances connected to Greenland. Fast forward decades later, one of those islands, Little St. James, ends up privately owned by Jeffrey Epstein. Now we just call it Pedophile Island. And then it got even more surreal. Republican Congressman Thomas Massey posted on Instagram saying, quote, "Psst, Denmark, tell this administration the Epstein files are in Greenland. They'll lose all interest and will never be able to find it," end quote. It was probably a sarcastic joke, but think about that for a second. We're at a point where geopolitical debate about Greenland and NATO can casually be tied back to Epstein by punchlines. What a time to be alive. At the same time, trust in institutions is near historic lows. People already believe that governments hide things, that powerful people play by different rules, and that transparency happens only when it's forced, if it happens at all. Across the globe, political turmoil is front-page stuff right now. From tumult in Venezuela's political transition and mass protest movements to debates over Greenland's strategic importance, and independence movements sparked by global power shifts. Closer to home, massive protests are happening around questions of accountability and power. Take the anti-ICE demonstrations in Minnesota and cities around the US, sparked by fatal encounters with federal agents and demands for systemic reform. And now there's this growing belief online that every massive headline is just noise to pull away attention from the files. Because here's what people keep asking. If this was such a huge network, where are all of the arrests?
Donald Trump can go start a war with Venezuela, arrest the president of Venezuela, and not one single one of the co-conspirators named in the Epstein files that we don't even know who they are yet has been charged or arrested.
That question doesn't go away, and it shouldn't go away. And no matter what dominates the news for a day or two, somehow the Epstein files climb right back to the top of the feed. There's no moving on from it, it seems. And let's not pretend this is a US-only situation. Money flies first class, and this case escalated from a scandal to a diplomatic problem. Yet no public figure connected to Epstein absorbed more sustained pressure than the former Prince Andrew.
Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is facing questions about a new accusation from a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, alleging that the late pedophile sent the woman to the UK for a sexual encounter with the former prince. The encounter allegedly happened at his royal residence in 2010. The woman, who is not British, was in her 20s at the time.
Unlike others, whose names appear in photographs or contact books, Andrew's case moved into direct accusation and formal review. The 2001 photograph of him with a 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre became central to her allegations that she was trying to have sex with him, a claim that he consistently denied.
That night, Prince Andrew came to her house in London, and we went out to Club Tramp. Prince Andrew got me alcohol, and Ghislaine said he's coming back to the house, and I want you to do for him what you do for Epstein.
In his 2019 Newsnight interview with the BBC, he questioned the image's authenticity, offered the Pizza Express alibi, and claimed he was, quote, not one for public displays of affection, end quote. In case you're curious about that clip, watch this and see if it's smooth sailing or if he's sinking fast.
I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat. To this day, I never had any contact with him.
That's what we call a royal train wreck. But then another image emerged, one that was taken in early December 2010. A barefoot Andrew is crouched on all fours over an unidentified young woman lying on the floor, while Andrew smiles at the camera. On its own, the second photo proves nothing criminal, but it weakened his credibility, particularly the character defense he had just offered. The scrutiny on Andrew did not stop with Virginia Giuffre. According to reporting, Thames Valley Police had also assessed a separate allegation that a woman, not British and in her 20s at the time, was allegedly sent to the UK by Epstein for a sexual encounter with Andrew at his former residence in 2010.
The then Prince Andrew and Elon Musk.
Be very, very well.
These are just a sample.
Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has argued that Andrew should face police questioning, citing flight records and concerns about investigative thoroughness. Police have reviewed materials and consulted prosecutors, but as of right now, no charges have been formally followed.
Why they didn't do anything about it then I think public disquiet can be satisfied. But I think if there's a sense that Andrew continues to be able to be protected by the royal family, then I think this is going to cause some big problems.
Yet Andrew was stripped of military titles and royal duties by his brother, King Charles III. Also in Britain, Morgan McSweeney resigned as Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Keir Starmer, following controversy over an appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States, despite his links to a known offender. In a statement, he said, quote, "The decision to appoint Peter Mandelson was wrong. He has damaged our party, our country, and trust in politics itself," end quote. And just when you thought the British Crown scandals were messy enough, enter Norway. Mona Juul, their ambassador to Jordan, stepped down after connections to Epstein surfaced. Looks like no one's holiday escape from this saga is safe. But Mona Juul's resignation was only a diplomatic tremor. The real earthquake in Norway involved someone much closer to the throne. The crown princess herself, Mette Moret. Once a single mom living what she called a quite wild life, Mette Moret Chesum Hoiby somehow fell for Norway's heir and became crown princess. Her stepdad called her extraordinary, though she admits her youth rebellion was basically royal-level chaos, with a few questionable decisions and, yes, some drugs along the way. And now she's smack dab in the middle of one of Epstein's most shocking royal scandals. Newly unsealed files appear to show years of contact between her and Jeffrey Epstein, nearly 1,000 mentions of her name across the latest tranche, and according to Norwegian outlet VG, the exchanges suggest they were in contact from 2011 to 2014, long after Epstein had already pleaded guilty in Florida to charges involving a In one message, she told him, quote, "You tickle my brain," unquote. In others, she called him soft-hearted and such a sweetheart. And in another email, she thanked him for sending flowers. In another email, she joked about whether it was, quote, "inappropriate for a mother to suggest two women carrying a surfboard for my 15-year-old son's wallpaper," end quote. There were also emails about Epstein being on a wife hunt in Paris. She replied that Paris was, quote, "good for adultery," and that Scandies are better wife material, unquote. And the timing could not have been worse, because all of this surfaced just as her son, Marusborg Corby, is set to stand trial in Oslo. He is facing 38 charges, including alleged rape of 4 women, along with assault and drug offenses. He denies the most serious accusations, but if convicted, he could face significant prison time. On January 31st, 2026, Mette Moret responded publicly saying, quote, "I showed poor judgment and I deeply regret having had any contact with Epstein. It is simply embarrassing," end quote. She has expressed some type of sympathy for the victims and said she failed to check his background closely enough. But here's the detail that complicates that explanation. In 2011, she emailed Epstein saying she had Googled him. "It didn't look too good," end quote, followed by a smiling emoji. That was 3 years before their written contact reportedly ended. The palace later stated she cut off communications in 2014 because she felt he was trying to use their relationship as leverage. Which raises the uncomfortable question: if it didn't look too good in 2011, why did it continue until 2014? That gap, even if it's just for a couple of years, is what fuels public distrust. In the United States, however, political reaction appeared muted. As some analysts noted, American politics has developed a kind of scandal fatigue, a system that absorbs controversy without any structural consequence. US President Donald Trump publicly stated in February that it was time for the country to move on from the Epstein files. But fortunately, public opinion on that has not moved on. Brookings Institution senior fellow Daryl West stated that, quote, Americans are not ready to move on from the Epstein story because there remains unanswered questions. The big issue is culpability for bad behavior. What will happen to those names in the files, end quote. That's the real tension. For survivors, though, this is more of a lived trauma than a political scandal. Now, millions of documents exist in the public domain, but no new wave of indictments have followed. And when transparency arrives without any accountability, it feels like exposure without resolution. And if you thought all of the big names had already been revealed, think again. There's more, much, much more. And I want to dive into that right now because the files contain so many more powerful names of politicians, business leaders, cultural icons, some appearing in flight logs, some in emails, some in witness accounts, and others in unverified allegations. And that raises a critical question. When someone's name appears in a document connected to a criminal case, what does that actually mean? Is it evidence, association, context, or coincidence? At what point does public scrutiny become justified accountability? And at what point does it become speculation? Because in a case this large with so many documents, the difference between being named and being implicated matters more than ever. There's a distinct moment that happens as you're scrolling through the Epstein files. You're moving past all of this dense legal language, pages of testimony, and archived emails. And then you see it, a name you recognize.
The Epstein files name some of the most powerful billionaires on Earth. Bill Gates, Forbes estimates Donald Trump, Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX.
And just like that, the documents stop feeling abstract. They feel personal. Because in a case built around exploitation and secrecy, power changes the temperature of everything. The public doesn't just ask, was this person involved? They ask something deeper. If someone with power was close enough to be documented, close enough to be photographed, close enough to be mentioned in correspondence, then how close is too close? And that's exactly the line we're going to examine. Now let's break down the biggest circulating claims, briefly, clearly, and in context. One of the most widely circulated revelations involves newly released emails between Elon Musk and Jeffrey Epstein from 2012 to 2013. In them, Musk and Epstein appear to cordially discuss the possibility of Musk visiting Little St. James, Epstein's private location in the Virgin Islands.
New emails from billionaire Elon Musk and Epstein coordinating a possible visit to the financier's infamous island.
In an email to Epstein in November 2012, Musk wrote, quote, "What day/night will be the wildest party on your island," end quote. Then in December of 2013, Musk wrote, quote, "Will be in the BVI/St. Bart's area over the holidays. Is there a good time to visit?" End quote. Epstein responded saying, quote, "Any day 1st through 8th. Play it by ear if you want. Always space for you." The two exchanged additional scheduling emails and tentatively settled on January 2nd. There's no evidence in the newly released documents that the visit ever occurred, but the context complicates Musk's previously public statements. In 2019, Musk told Vanity Fair that Epstein was, quote, "obviously a creep," unquote, and claimed that Epstein, quote, "tried repeatedly to get me to visit the island. I declined." End quote. The newly released documents showed that while a visit did not take place, there were at least cordial and reciprocal discussions about potentially visiting. However, Musk had something to say about these allegations.
He wrote, "No one pushed harder than me to have the Epstein files released, and I'm glad that has finally happened. I had very little correspondence with Epstein and declined repeated invitations to go to his island or fly on his Lolita Express, but was well aware that some email correspondence with him could be misinterpreted and used by detractors to smear my name. I don't care about that, but what I do care about is that we at least attempt to prosecute those who committed serious crimes with Epstein, especially regarding heinous exploitation of others."
But the scrutiny does not end there. House Democrats previously released a copy of Epstein's daily schedule showing a 2014 calendar entry that read, quote, "Reminder, Elon Musk to island December 6th. In parentheses, is this still happening?" Unquote. No further details were provided in that entry, and Musk has responded publicly on X saying, quote, "This is false," end quote. He has also denied knowing Epstein's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, stating that a widely circulating photograph of them together at a Vanity Fair event was a result of her photobombing him. Musk has acknowledged visiting Epstein's Manhattan apartment one time for approximately 30 minutes with Tallulah Riley while she was researching a book. But there's another layer to this. Musk himself has invoked Epstein's name in public disputes. During a fallout with Donald Trump, Musk claimed the president's name appeared in the Epstein files, later deleting posts referencing the allegation. Isn't that ironic? Very ironic. He also criticized Bill Gates over Gates' prior meetings with Epstein, questioning Gates' credibility on issues involving children. Quote, "Who does Bill Gates think he is to make comments about the welfare of children, given that he frequented Jeffrey Epstein?" End quote. Trust me, we'll want to get back to Bill Gates later. For some people, the contrast between Musk's outspoken advocacy on human rights issues and his documented communications with Epstein invites uncomfortable questions about his consistency. For instance, Bushra Sheikh, a UK-based political commentator and social media activist, posted on X saying, quote, "Elon Musk posts endlessly about Pakistani group gangs, migrant rapists, yet he happily emailed convicted child rapist and trafficker Jeffrey Epstein in 2012 through 2013, 4 years after Epstein was convicted in 2008. Now he's scrambling on social media for damage control," end quote. Now there is one name that appeared more than any other in the Epstein files, 1,000 times to be exact, and that name is Donald Trump.
Trump's name appears more times in the Epstein files than God's name appears in the book about God. Trump's name also appears more times in the Epstein file than Harry Potter's name appears in the 7 books about Harry Potter.
That number alone became viral. A DOJ database search reportedly returned more than 1,800 indexed references, many of which were benign news articles Epstein forwarded, commentary about Trump's presidency, media clippings, political gossip exchanged with associates like Steve Bannon. But buried inside the files were also unverified allegations. Among them was an FBI-compiled list of misconduct allegations related to Trump, gathered through tip lines and secondhand submissions. Notes referencing a lawsuit filed by an anonymous Jane Doe who alleged Trump raped her when she was 13 years old. But this lawsuit was dropped before trial. Other FBI interview notes from another Epstein victim stated that Ghislaine Maxwell once presented her to Trump at a party.
She was approximately 13 to 14 years old. Complainant reported being threatened by Trump's then head of security. If she ever talked of what went on there or who she saw, he would end up as fertilizer for the back 9 holes like the other.
We don't know for sure if these claims are true or not. Only time will tell. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice stated clearly that the allegations against Trump in the files were, quote, "untrue and sensationalist claims," end quote, and that they were submitted before the 2020 election and that there was no evidence they were credible. Trump himself responded to this saying, quote, "Not only does it absolve me, it's the opposite of what people were hoping," end quote. But the files reinforced that Trump and Epstein were socially connected for years in the 1990s and early 2000s. They were photographed together, they attended the same events, and moved in overlapping circles. In older footage that resurfaced online, Epstein himself spoke about being friends with Trump for over a decade.
Have you ever socialized with Donald Trump in the presence of females under the age of 18?
Though I'd like to answer that question, at least today, I'm going to have to assert my 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights, sir.
That clip has been widely circulated again since the latest release. The files also show that the federal prosecutors gathered evidence in 2020 that Trump flew on Epstein's private plane multiple times in the 1990s, which contradicts earlier public statements in which Trump said that he was never on it. Now, while everyone is searching for names in the files all day long, internet sleuths are searching for singular words as well. And one word in particular began trending again: pizza.
No one can seem to agree on anything anymore except for 2 things: pizza and us. And us.
Cruised down, went over to their house. They made us homemade pizza, and it was an amazing time. I sat next to Bono. It was a good day.
Okay, hold on. These clips might have been taken out of context, but there's a reason why everything might seem connected. According to the document searches circulating online, the term pizza appeared more than 900 times across the released files, spanning years before and after the 2016 election. Influencers on TikTok, Reels, and X began posting screenshots highlighting phrases like, quote, "What time do you want to get pizza and grape soda tomorrow? End quote. Your pizza is yummy yummy. And let's go for pizza and grape soda again. No one else can understand. And for some users, repetition became proof.
An undated email with the subject line, U9 Red Pizza Party. For those who don't know, U stands for under. So the subject line is under 9, talking about the children's age, pizza party.
But this isn't the first time food language has sparked online panic. In 2016, a conspiracy theory known as Pizzagate claimed that Democratic officials were running a child trafficking ring out of a Washington, D.C. pizza restaurant, Comet Ping Pong. The theory originated on 4chan's political message board and spread rapidly throughout Reddit, YouTube, and fringe media platforms. Users dissected emails released by WikiLeaks, arguing that phrases like cheese pizza were coded references to child exploitation. There was no evidence of that, but the theory escalated anyway, and here's the story. On December 4th, 2016, a 28-year-old man named Edgar Welch drove from North Carolina to Comet Ping Pong armed with an AR-15 rifle and a revolver. He fired multiple shots inside the restaurant, claiming he was there to rescue children. There were no children. There wasn't even a basement. But the incident became one of the clearest examples of how online conspiracy thinking can spill into real-world violence. Now, nearly a decade later, the Epstein document release has reopened that same cultural wound. But let's get back to the names. It wasn't unusual for Jeffrey Epstein to surround himself with scientists. He seemed captivated by their brilliance, eager to orbit their reputations. And among the most prominent of those he courted was the world-renowned physicist Stephen Hawking. He was pictured at a 2006 scientific conference held on Jeffrey Epstein's private island in the Virgin Islands. This image isn't new, but in the context of millions of newly released files, it took on new life online.
Stephen Hawking appeared in Epstein-related records, and he was reportedly seen in a setting where children were present. Photos also show him appearing in the same frame as Jeffrey Epstein, P. Diddy, Bill Gates, Jay-Z, and others. When I saw that image, I could hardly believe it. This was the last person anyone would expect to be involved.
Then an even more explosive detail resurfaced. In a 2015 email unsealed as part of a defamation lawsuit filed by survivor Virginia Giuffre against Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein wrote to Maxwell about an allegation Giuffre had made, that Hawking had participated in what he called a, quote, underage unquote, during a visit. In the email, Epstein suggested offering a reward to anyone who could help disprove the claim. That line detonated across social media.
Do you see where I'm coming from? Like, would it be ableist to be like, no, he definitely wasn't doing any of that freak shit? Because what if he was?
But there's no evidence in the unredacted court documents that support this allegation against Hawking. And, well, the guy's dead, so defending himself isn't going to happen. But there is a name associated with Jeffrey Epstein that is a little less speculative: Bill Gates. Unlike some figures whose connections are limited to photographs or secondhand mentions, Gates has admitted he met with Epstein multiple times after Epstein's 2008 conviction in Florida for soliciting prostitution from a minor.
You know, I had dinners with him. I regret doing that.
But the newly released DOJ documents added a fresh layer of controversy. Among the roughly 3 million pages was a draft email Epstein had written to himself in 2013. In it, Epstein appeared to claim that Gates had contracted a sexually transmitted infection after encounters with, quote, Russian girls, unquote. And Gates had asked Epstein to help obtain antibiotics that he could secretly give to his then wife, Melinda French Gates. This email, riddled with typos, was never sent, and Gates has categorically denied all of these claims.
Bill Gates, of course, maintains that it was completely above board. He says the fact this allegation was in here just shows how much Epstein was willing to defame people. But Epstein lays it out. He says he helped Bill get drugs in order to deal with the consequences of sex with Russian girls, facilitating his illicit trysts with married women, and to being asked to provide for bridge tournaments. Look, guys, this is exactly what we suspected the whole time. Epstein was providing services to rich people.
In an interview with Australia's Channel 9 News, reported by ABC and covered by international outlets, including France 24 and People, Gates addressed the allegations publicly for the first time, saying, quote, Jeffrey wrote an email to himself. That email was never sent. The email is false, end quote. A spokesperson for Gates added that the allegations were, quote, absolutely absurd and completely false, end quote, arguing that the document reflects Epstein's frustration over losing access to Gates rather than actual evidence of misconduct. Gates also reiterated that he never visited Epstein's island. He never attended parties there. He had no involvement in illegal activity connected to Epstein. According to Gates, quote, I regret every minute I spent with him. It was a mistake, end quote. But the story didn't end with his denial. For Melinda French Gates, the resurfacing of Epstein's name reopened what she has described as some of the most painful years of her life. Appearing on NPR's Wild Card podcast, Melinda spoke candidly about what it feels like to see her former husband's name pulled back into the Epstein's orbit. Quote,
for me, it's personally hard whenever those details come up, right? Because brings back memories of some very, very painful times in my marriage. And I am so happy to be away from all the muck.
The couple who divorced in 2021 after 27 years of marriage has long been viewed as one of the most powerful partnerships in global philanthropy. But U.S. media previously reported that Melinda had been uncomfortable with Jeffrey Epstein's presence in Bill Gates' professional orbit well before their separation. Before we go any further, we need to pause, because the biggest mistake people are making right now is confusing being named with being charged. Those are not the same thing.
The truth is much more powerful than embellishment. Obama was mentioned 2,479 times, yes, but it's a more powerful statement to say that even though he was mentioned so many times, none of those mentions implicate him in any wrongdoing. That is a much more powerful statement than just reposting something that sounds good but is not true. Just because somebody is in the Epstein files doesn't mean they are implicated in any wrongdoing.
Some of the most recognizable figures connected to Epstein appear in one of the broadest and least precise categories: social proximity. Among them are Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Stephen Hawking, Bill Clinton, former Prince Andrew, Woody Allen, and Michael Jackson. And again, what does appear mean in this context? In many cases, it means photographs. In others, it means flight logs. Sometimes it's an email exchange. Sometimes it's a mention inside tip paperwork submitted to investigations. Reuters and other outlets have released archived images showing Epstein alongside high-profile figures at events, dinners, and private gatherings. That establishes proximity. It does not, by itself, establish criminal conduct. But proximity to power, especially after Epstein's 2008 conviction, undoubtedly raises reputational questions. And reputational questions travel faster than legal ones. That's step one. Public association. Now we'll move on to the next layer, where names appear not in photographs, but in tips and raw investigative paperwork. Among the newly resurfaced mentions, we have Jay-Z, Pusha T, and Harvey Weinstein. Their names did not appear in Epstein's personal address book or flight manifests in this context. They surfaced inside an archived FBI crisis intake report, or a tip.
So people want to know why Jay-Z was in the Epstein files. Well, it was said that he was present with Harvey Weinstein, who was a good friend of his, by the way, and Jeffrey Epstein when a victim was abducted. Well, let's hear what Harvey Weinstein said himself.
In your thoughts on Donald Trump and what it means for mass incarceration.
You know what? This is a labor of love for Jay, and as a result, he's my friend. We're here to talk about that and nothing else.
Then can I ask about mass incarceration?
In that report, an anonymous woman claimed she had been drugged and sexually abused over multiple incidents and alleged that Pusha T was one of her handlers. She also stated that she once woke up in a room with Weinstein and Jay-Z present. The report notes her memory was clouded because she said she was drugged.
And now with all of this happening, Drake seemingly responded to this entire situation on his Instagram post by throwing a diss at Jay-Z and Pusha T by trolling them. This is what Drake ended up posting to his Instagram page, which was him throwing up the 6 God hand symbol within the caption saying more time with family and friends.
The release also included far more mundane references, from glamorous film premieres to eyebrow-raising inboxes. Director Mira Nair pops up in Epstein's emails about an Amelia after party. And then, just a few threads over from that, we're in way more, let's say, uncomfortable territory, with Casey Wasserman, chairman of the LA 28 Olympics Committee, and Ghislaine Maxwell, who traded messages that are pretty explicit. In one exchange, Maxwell offers Wasserman a massage that could, quote, drive a man wild, end quote.
So far in the music world, the first person to speak out is Bethany Constantino from Best Coast, who's been signed to Wasserman since 2021. She writes, "It's come to my attention that the founder-CEO of my agency, Casey Wasserman, had a documented romantic relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell between the years of 2001 and 2003 and multiple documented connections and communications with Jeffrey Epstein. As an artist represented by Wasserman, I did not consent to having my name or my career tied to someone with this kind of association to accusation." Casey's response that these emails are deeply regretted is not enough, she says. Regret without accountability is just damage control.
Wasserman has stated his interactions with Maxwell occurred more than 2 decades ago. He denied any personal or business relationship with Epstein and expressed regret for having any association.
He said, quote, "I deeply regret my correspondence with Ghislaine Maxwell, which took place over 2 decades ago, long before her horrific crimes came to light," Wasserman said. "I never had a personal or business relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, as is well documented, and I'm terribly sorry for having any association with either of them."
This is a separate category again. Historic social contact, acknowledged, contextualized, and publicly addressed. And speaking of Ghislaine Maxwell, this is where the category changes completely, because Maxwell, is a convicted co-conspirator. Let's remember that prosecutors argued that from at least 1994 through the early 2000s, Maxwell helped Epstein by identifying vulnerable new girls, befriending and grooming them, and normalized Epstein's behavior by being present. She also helped arrange travel to his residence, manage household staff in Palm Beach, supervised logistics, and encouraged victims to recruit other girls. Even former employees described Maxwell as the house manager who controlled staff and enforced strict rules inside Epstein's mansion. Some survivors testified that Maxwell controlled the girls, prepared them, reassured them, and created the atmosphere that made all of this possible. The prosecution's argument was blunt. Epstein could not have built or maintained that system without Maxwell. In December 2021, a federal jury agreed. Maxwell was found guilty of trafficking of a minor and related conspiracy charges. She was later sentenced to 20 years in prison. Her defense team argued that she was being scapegoated for a dead man, that Epstein, who allegedly died in custody in 2019, would never face a full trial, and Ghislaine was left holding the weight of public fury. But jurors were instructed to focus on evidence, testimony, documentation, corroboration, and they convicted her on 5 of 6 counts. And that is the clearest criminal nexus in the entire Epstein network: conviction. But let's get one thing straight. Civil cases and criminal cases operate under different standards. In a criminal case, the government prosecutes someone for breaking the law. The burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt, the highest legal standard we have. A conviction can mean significant prison time. In a civil case, private individuals sue for damages or accountability. The standard is lower, usually a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. Civil filings can include sworn testimony, depositions, and sometimes hearsay or allegations that were never tested in a criminal trial. A civil case can often result in financial settlement without the prison time.
We've heard the most disturbing allegations tied to Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Peter Attia, like so many sports owners and just so many people. And yet nothing happens. No prosecution, no criminal charges, no real penalties.
So when you see names in civil complaints, deposition transcripts, or lawsuit exhibits, that does not automatically mean a crime was proven in court. It means an allegation entered a legal record under a different standard. At the same time, patterns do matter. Repeated mentions, multiple independent accounts, and supporting documents that align over time. Even when something doesn't reach the threshold for criminal indictment, it can still create a powerful public record, one that shapes reputations, institutional reform, and policy debates. Survivors have said the document releases have been deeply traumatic.
My name is Marina Lacerda. I was victim 1 in federal indictment of Jeffrey Epstein in New York in 2019. I was one of dozens of girls that I personally know who were forced into Jeffrey's mansion when we were just kids.
The files expose deeply personal testimony, sometimes with redactions that still leave victims identifiable, while broader accountability remains incomplete. For many of them, transparency without full justice feels, at the very least, unfinished. And that tension between legal proof and public record sits at the center of how these files should be read. So the real payoff isn't a hidden list or a dramatic reveal. It's this. The files don't answer the question people thought they would. They change the question, not who is secretly guilty, but what does justice look like when proof, power, and public exposure don't align? What happens when raw legal material, full of caveats, enters an ecosystem built for speed, outrage, and algorithm? They become weapons. And when outrage moves faster than verification, something always gets lost. The question is, what? We know social media became the distribution engine for the Epstein files.
This deeply unsettling image was removed from the DOJ's Epstein website, and people don't know why. But usually they are removing images and documents that contain graphic images and things that they shouldn't have released, but this photo has none of that. This photo just appears to be a picture of steaks or meat and nothing else. I don't know.
Y'all, these Epstein files are making me into a person I don't want to be. At midnight, what was happening during that time? Right. Epstein, right? New York, FBI. The subject, it's an ops order. It's like they want us to come up with stuff, because that obviously sounds like they said, take care of that man, right? Does that...
New reports show that Jeffrey Epstein's FedEx account was still active and being used as recently as 2024, despite the fact he, of course, passed away.
But how is this unfolding? First is speed. Court documents and reporting that once required hours to read now circulate in minutes, clipped, cropped, and captioned for impact. Secondly is amplification. Algorithms reward engagement, not accuracy. Flight logs, high-profile names, and shocking allegations rise to the top because they trigger outrage, curiosity, or disbelief. Third is interpretation, layered over interpretation. Users don't just share documents, they narrate them. They highlight passages, circle names, connect dots, and add commentary. Each repost adds framing, and framing can quietly shift the meaning. Social media expands access and awareness, but it also compresses complexity and accelerates the spread of incomplete, misleading, or downright false claims. And once something goes viral, correction rarely travels as far as the original accusations. Then there are the producers, YouTube and Instagram creators who are packaging documents. They compile timelines, narrate screenshots, splicing in past interviews, and connecting dots across years of reporting.
The woman that accused Trump in the Epstein files was found dead in her car.
They found a code word for human meat? Wait, what? JoJo is here and will walk the jerky over to Jeffrey. Why would jerky walk around? Delicious lunch, beef jerky. There is one bag of beef jerky in the fridge. Are there any recorded images of Jeffrey eating beef jerky? No, there are no recorded Jeffrey Epstein with beef jerky in the picture. Isn't it weird?
That kind of analysis can be valuable. But here's the suitable shift. When a creator pauses on a name, zooms in on a sentence, and says, "Why is this here?" the question can start to sound like an answer in itself. Speculation framed as a question can land as confirmation. Add in some confident narration, editing, music, and repetition, and interpretation hardens into preconceived fact for a lot of viewers.
Got some news. Emmanuel Macron is gay. Why are you gay, Emmanuel Macron? They are discussing Emmanuel Macron's boyfriend. It is Epstein.
And oftentimes the audience is not distinguishing between what the document explicitly proves, what it alleges, what it's suggesting, and what the creator might be inferring.
You know that the Epstein files have to have a file number on it, right? So if you're seeing something being shared amongst TikTok, which I was just shown it, there's no file number on it.
That blur is where virality turns analysis into belief. And once belief locks in, context has a hard time of catching up. But if there's one thing messier than the whole facts versus fake news thing, it has to be this so-called client list. In fact, the Department of Justice and the FBI issued a joint memo addressing two of the most persistent claims surrounding the Epstein case. Their conclusions were clear. Investigators found no, quote, incriminating client list, end quote. They apparently found no credible evidence that Epstein maintained a secret roster of powerful individuals involved in a structured trafficking ring. They found no evidence sufficient to predicate investigations into uncharged third parties. And they reaffirmed the medical examiner's conclusion that Epstein died by suicide in 2019. Because some people claim that Jeffrey Epstein is still alive and may be living in Israel.
This is a photo of Jeffrey pulled from the Epstein files. Notice the tribal tattoo on his upper left arm. This is one of the autopsy photos that was given to CBS for a 60 Minutes episode about his death. Notice no tattoo. Hold on. Here's a picture that's been circulating the internet wildly the last couple of days. It's supposedly Jeffrey alive and well in Israel. I have to tell you, that does look like him.
The memo also stated investigators did not uncover evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent figures in a coordinated way, another core online theory. Even officials who had previously questioned the suicide finding, including FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, acknowledged after reviewing materials that the official determination stands. So the DOJ says there is no verified client list, but the mass release of uncategorized names without clearly separating who was investigated, who was charged, who was convicted, who was simply mentioned, leaves a lot of space for interpretation.
France has the unredacted files, and they are using them in an investigation, but they have not released them to the public. That has not occurred, so that is misinformation.
When institutions speak in evidentiary language and the internet speaks in accusation, the louder voice usually wins, and that tension between documentation and narrative is what keeps the story alive. What makes the Epstein files different is not just who appears in them, but how much documentation existed and what didn't happen next. A 3-year Senate investigation led by Ron Wyden uncovered Treasury Department records showing 4,725 wire transfers totaling roughly $1.1 billion moved through Epstein's financial network.
Well, so you have found more than $1 billion moving through, I think it is 4 international banks around Epstein already. Is that correct?
We actually found, Heather, at just one bank, one account, more than 4 billion wire transfers.
Yet despite hundreds of law enforcement agencies having theoretical access to financial intelligence systems, no comprehensive follow-the-money investigation materialized at the scale many would expect. This is what some analysts call a documentation paradox, an abundance of evidence without corresponding accountability. The argument isn't that there was a secret master conspiracy coordinating protection. It's more unsettling than that. The theory suggests an impunity threshold, a point at which extreme wealth buys elite lawyers and triggers institutional paralysis. 3 mechanisms are often cited: financial institutions filing required reports but not escalating aggressively, law enforcement agencies with access to data failing to synthesize or pursue it comprehensively, bipartisan political caution when investigations touch powerful networks, parallel oversight efforts by Senator Wyden and Sheldon Whitehouse documented what they described as executive branch resistance to disclosure. Even confusion around testimony became part of the story. During his confirmation process, FBI Director Kash Patel suggested court orders prevented discussion of his grand jury testimony. Later, Chief Judge James Boasberg clarified he was free to discuss his own testimony. That contradiction feeds a broader concern. If overwhelming documentation can coexist with limited institutional response, what does equal justice under law mean when suspects operate at the highest level of wealth and influence? The Epstein case tests democratic legitimacy because when ordinary people face aggressive prosecution while the ultra-wealthy move through the system with complete ease, it feels like the system itself is under strain. And that perception is why this still matters right now. Now let's separate rhetoric from record, because conspiracy theories, well, there's plenty of those. And one of them sounds pretty close to your next spy thriller. The claim is that Jeffrey Epstein was an Israeli intelligence asset, running a Mossad-backed honey trap to blackmail global elites.
And this was just a random t-shirt that he bought at a thrift store. Don't worry, it had nothing to do with the actual logo on his t-shirt. No. Jeffrey Epstein has absolutely zero evidence of having any connections to Israel. This was all just for entertainment, beautiful people, and I'm as fictional as a dinosaur, baby.
This theory resurfaces constantly. It intensified again after comments from Representative Anna Paulina Luna.
The victims themselves have stated that this is a lot bigger than I think anyone anticipated. There's some very rich and powerful people that need to go to jail. I think everyone's been frustrated as to why that hasn't happened before.
That statement spread rapidly online, often reframed as confirmation rather than speculation. So let's look at the actual evidence. The central figure in the Mossad narrative is Ari Ben Menashe, who claims Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell ran a blackmail operation tied to Israeli intelligence. He has alleged that Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, was a Mossad asset, and that Epstein's operation mirrored intelligence honey trap tactics.
The entire Epstein operation was a honey trap operation to entrap politicians, policymakers, celebrities, people in the media eye, basically to become Israel's assets.
Correct.
Honestly, with the Maxwells being just as shady as Epstein, it wouldn't exactly shock me if their whole family were secretly Mossad operatives. Another cited source is Stephen Hoffenberg, Epstein's former business associate. Before his death, he claimed Epstein boasted about intelligence ties. Those statements, however, were never independently verified. Then there's Maria Farmer, one of Epstein's earliest known victims, who described the network as a blackmail operation tied to wealthy pro-Israel donors. The theory often points to Epstein's relationship with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. So first, here are some documented facts. It's true that Ehud Barak visited Epstein's residence.
Barak visited Epstein about 30 times between 2013 and 2017.
They both had financial and business connections, including ties to the tech firm Carbine. And there are photos showing Barak entering Epstein's townhouse in 2016. However, Barak has denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes and denies intelligence collaboration.
I now deeply regret having any association with him. Not any point in my dealings with him, I did ever witness any important.
The theory also invokes Les Wexner's financial relationship with Epstein and references to the mega group of pro-Israel philanthropists.
So Les Wexner, he owns Limited Brands, L Brands, billionaire, incredibly wealthy guy. As you said, owns the largest and most expensive house in the state of Ohio, where he lives in Columbus. And the second largest and most expensive house in the state of Ohio was owned by Jeffrey Epstein and was directly behind Wexner's house.
What?
Yeah.
While Wexner undeniably funded and empowered Epstein for years, there is no verified intelligence finding that this constituted a Mossad operation. Then there's the 2008 plea deal. Former U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta reportedly said he was told Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence, unquote, when negotiating Epstein's 2008 plea deal. But the DOJ and FBI, in their recent memo, stated they found no evidence of a coordinated intelligence-backed blackmail operation. Major outlets, including Newsweek, Rolling Stone, The Wall Street Journal, and Reuters, have reported on the allegations, while noting there are no on-the-record confirmations from U.S. or Israeli intelligence agencies that Epstein was a spy. And if you thought this is the only conspiracy theory circulating right now, think again, because there are plenty more. One of the most interesting ones is that New York Mayor Zohan Mamdani is Epstein's biological son. So where does this rumor come from? Images began circulating online that appeared to show Mamdani as a child alongside his mother, filmmaker Mira Nair, and Jeffrey Epstein. Spoiler alert, these images were AI generated.
But millions of people are seeing them. Like, this post alone was viewed 22 million times, and now people are protesting outside of Zoran's house.
That's right, we know about your mom. Now listen, we was with you, Zoran. We voted for you, Zoran. We love Zoran. Stay, Zoran. Stay.
This is when AI gets so harmful and so dangerous, and it's important to spread the word that none of this is true.
According to reporting from Reuters, Google's SynthID detection tool identified the 3 viral images as containing AI watermarks consistent with generative image models. The account that originally posted them described itself as, quote, an AI-powered meme engine that turns stupidity into content, unquote. I think that speaks for itself. In other words, parody content was repackaged as documentary evidence. Nair told Reuters that the images were completely fabricated and false, and stated that her and her son never posed for such photographs and did not know the people depicted in the background. Even Mamdani himself has addressed these allegations.
It is incredibly difficult to see images that you know to be fake, that are patently photoshopped and AI generated, and yet can reach across the entirety of the world in an era of misinformation. And there's the old adage about how quickly a lie can spread with a comparison to the truth.
Now here's the factual kernel that made those fake pictures slightly believable. Mamdani's mother, Mira Nair, who we talked about earlier.
This started with a kernel of truth because Mamdani's mom, who's a famous filmmaker, was mentioned once in the files. This email Epstein received from a publicist did just come out in the files. She said, just left Ghislaine's townhouse after party for film. Bill Clinton and Jeff Bezos were there. Jean Pagozzi, director Mira Nair, ... etc. And Mira Nair is Mamdani's mom. That is the one and only time she's mentioned in the files, and we know Ghislaine was a socialite in New York who attended lots of premieres and events, so it's not surprising that she would host an after party for a film. Somehow that brief mention has spiraled into people thinking Epstein is Mamdani's dad.
Critically, the wording suggests Epstein was the recipient of the email, meaning he was being told about the party, not necessarily attending it. That nuance disappears online. And then there's a theory that sounds like a horror screenplay.
¡Comieron humanos! ¡Asquerosidad! ¡Comieron humanos! Yo no estaba enterada de nada. Que había, o sea, los asesinatos sí, pero que habían comido humanos! ¡Humanos!
This is Gabriela Rico Menendez, a model who previously claimed she was and abused within Jeffrey Epstein's network. At the time, her allegations involved claims of cannibalism around Epstein's circle. Yes, you heard that right. Recently, social media buzzed over her whereabouts, but no authorities have confirmed she's missing, and the files remain largely unverified. This is the part that honestly gives me pause, because when we start running with unverified rumors, it shifts the spotlight away from the people who were actually hurt. However, there is one chat that made people ask themselves, was Gabriella telling the truth back then? The conversation involves Epstein and his dear friend, film director, and sex offender Woody Allen. Epstein joked with Allen about eating hearts and bones. Allen responded to this saying, quote, thanks, at least I'm thinner, end quote, followed by Epstein saying, quote, because you also eat the bones, providing fiber, end quote, to which Allen says, quote, I don't like waste, end quote. While there's no evidence of actual cannibalism, the conversation has fueled speculation and horror across social media.
There was talk about this is literally everything that we have been telling you about for 10 years. I know since 2020, any video that I had ever posted about it would get my account banned. I was literally banned 2 to 3 times a year for posting about this. So why now? Why all of a sudden do they want the truth out?
Is this some sort of weird predator humor, or is this actually real? For now, we still don't know the truth. Maybe more proof will come in the upcoming days. So before we get to this next story, you need to understand who we're talking about. Glenn Dubin, a hedge fund billionaire with serious Wall Street money, and his wife, Eva Anderson Dubin, a former Miss Sweden and model, and who later became a doctor. But here's the weird part. She also dated Epstein for years in the 80s before she married her husband, Glenn Dubin. Even after her marriage to Glenn, her and Epstein stayed close. Very close. After Epstein pled guilty in 2008 to soliciting a minor and becoming a registered sex offender, most people started to distance themselves from him. Not Eva. Recently unsealed DOJ records show that in 2010, 2 years after that conviction, Eva emailed him saying, quote, come and visit next week. Selena will have 5 friends over, end quote. Her daughter, Selena, was reportedly 15 years old at that time. And it wasn't a one-off. She had already acknowledged his conviction to his probation officer and said she felt completely at ease with him being around her children. Records show that Eva and Glenn invited Epstein to Thanksgiving and that their kids referred to him as Uncle F. I mean, the picture alone says it all, and honestly, it makes your skin crawl. But unfortunately, there's more to this.
When you start really researching the Epstein files, you will see a lot of disturbing things. You will read a lot of disturbing things. And I have shared with you guys a lot of disturbing things that I've found in an effort to raise awareness and to teach people that these disturbing things happened, have been happening, and are going to continue to happen.
Yeah, this is another level of diversity. And again, that's not all, but a quick heads up, because what you're about to hear is genuinely disturbing, like stomach-turning disturbing. It involves yet another case of child molestation, and this one is quite explicit, so brace yourselves.
This is truly one of the most horrific things that I've seen so far in the Epstein files. In 2020, before Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, in an attempt to provide evidence, and basically they said that they are representing a girl, a young Israeli girl who was trafficked to Maxwell and Epstein, and was then trafficked to a number of adults through the Epstein network. And yes, the child victim, who was only a few years old, remembers being raped by multiple men at the fancy rich guy's house.
I wish this was an exaggeration, but it's not. Stories like these just keep coming, which makes it hard to write them off as simple conspiracy theories. This next one isn't that alarming, but it's definitely unusual. Jeffrey Epstein, as you probably know, was a longtime bachelor with a very specific curated circle. In the last days before his death, the files show he was obsessively planning his future with his longtime then-girlfriend, Karina Shulak. 2 days before he died, he scribbled a note on a financial document saying he had given her a 32.73 carat diamond ring in contemplation of marriage. And that's not all. He also planned to leave her $100 million and basically every single one of his homes, including the Manhattan mansion, a Paris apartment, his New Mexico ranch, and his 2 private islands. Shulak was the single biggest beneficiary in what's called the 1953 Trust, a document detailing who would get what after Epstein's death. Now, what makes this weirdly intense is the timing. This was 2 years after he had been convicted of and was registered as a offender. The fact that he spent the night before his alleged death on a private call with Shulak, who would have been his fiancée at the time, is eyebrow-raising at the very least. And now, here's one last conspiracy, one that's more of a symbolic narrative.
C'est un mode opératoire classique du pouvoir qu'on voit souvent dans les films.
This is where the real power is. Invitation only, unless of course you invite yourself.
On vit dans un système anti-vie qui cherche à nous couper de l'empathie. Dans la mode, les regards sont dissociés, traumatisés. Les peluches pour enfants sont équipées d'accessoires BDSM. Les campagnes ont des messages dissimulés, avec des images d'enfants démembrés. C'est la logique du traumatisme lié au programme MK Ultra.
Online, you'll see claims like this Instagram reel, which suggests that powerful networks, quote, break victims to make them programmable, end quote, implying some kind of engineered process of control beyond the known criminal abuse. It's a metaphor people use to describe a feeling of system-wide exploitation, not necessarily a factual description of documented methods. To understand why this kind of explanation catches fire online, it helps to look at how striking symbolic stories spread and how they get tied to real-world scandals. One of the most commonly referenced cultural parallels is Eyes Wide Shut, the final film by Stanley Kubrick. Eyes Wide Shut is often discussed in conspiracy circles because its story involves elite gatherings behind closed doors, masks and anonymity, power, secrecy, and sexual taboos presented as part of a hidden social order. Kubrick's film ended with an ambiguous final scene that left viewers scratching their heads. After Kubrick's death, various rumors emerged suggesting that the film's original cut was altered by someone else, and that Kubrick was somehow silenced because he had revealed too much.
I think Kubrick already told us exactly what happened to JonBenet Ramsey. I think this is exactly why the case remains unsolved. Kubrick made Eyes Wide Shut to expose the elites, Epstein's list, their pedo ring, specifically what happened at the end to Helena, their daughter.
Also, I think thinking 3 steps ahead of everybody at any kind of given moment.
The two men that are throughout the movie that are constantly in the background of the film, you see those two guys walking off with the daughter.
When people see something as morally repellent as the Epstein case, abuse of power, exploitation of vulnerable people, secrecy, and involvement of high-status individuals, the imagination rushes to explain why and how this could happen. So story framework like Eyes Wide Shut helps people fill the emotional and symbolic gap. Okay, I know I said that was the last conspiracy I had, but I lied, there's one more. And this one is actually kind of funny. A job seeker recently went viral for sending the wildest subject line you can possibly imagine. Your name is in the Epstein files. He apparently wanted to make sure someone actually opened his email, and it worked. In the message, he apologized for the drama, explained that inboxes are overcrowded, and then proceeded to apply for a marketing job with his resume attached. That's super creative, but definitely not subtle. But hey, extra points for grabbing attention. At the end of the day, these documents won't close the book. If anything, they underline the unanswered pages, and that's exactly why everyone is still watching. And this isn't the only time we've seen power, money, and secrecy collide in ways that leave the public piecing things together after the fact. There's always another case with different players from a different decade, but the same pattern of influence, access, and unanswered questions remain. And we'll be breaking that down soon. If you want context before the headlines spin it for you, make sure you're subscribed. Hit the button, turn on notifications, and don't miss what's coming next. That's what's been cooking on The Noisy Dish.